Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the basics of flying the Pipistrel virus SW121. Normally, of course, start inside the flight simulator, but I just want to point something out really quickly before we do get carried away. And that's the fact, if you select this aircraft by default, and you go over to weight and balance, you're going to notice this aircraft automatically starts out of proper weight and balance. Now, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind when you look at this right away. If you leave this as is, it's going to be difficult to lift the nose of this plane. Fortunately, we're such a teeny tiny plane that's not going to matter that much, but it is something you want to kind of keep an eye out for. A couple of quick ways to fix this. The first thing you can do is give yourself a full tank of gas. The problem is, as you guessed it, as we start to run out of fuel, we suddenly come back out of our center of gravity safety range. Now you'll notice the center of gravity safety range only really is a problem when you're about half a tank, which ironically is what most people set it to. The quick solution to that, of course, is to adjust the weight of your pilot and your passenger. Obviously, if I crank that up, that doesn't do much for me. If I crank it down, it actually shifts my weight back. So now that dead zone gets shifted, unfortunately, all the way forward. So this is a neat little problem that it's kind of fun to kind of play with, because unfortunately we don't have the ability to toss baggage in the back here. So it's one of those things where even though it is technically a problem, it's not going to be a lethal problem for us. I've got to put half our load here, because like I said, we don't have that extra bit there. But anyway, I want to start with that, and now we'll pop in the simulator and take it for a spin. All right, here we are over in the simulator, ready to get everything going. So first things first, this aircraft is an ultralight aircraft. It seats two, and by seating two, I mean that's kind of wishful thinking in my opinion as far as capacity with this particular thing goes. But hey, we're going to make the best of it as we always do. So first things first, let's go ahead and pop inside the cockpit. I've got myself my handy dandy little POH open. I'll provide you guys a link down in the comments for those of you who want to follow along with it. So the first thing we're going to be interested in doing here is we're going to make sure that everything's been pre-flighted. We've checked everything. Everything's looking pretty good to go. It is. This particular aircraft is one of those that likes to start on external power. It doesn't mean you have to start on external power. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop down here. You've got a master and an avionics switch. We're going to start by making sure our brakes are set, which I already said a moment ago. We're going to make sure our fuel selector is set to the fullest tank. Our fuel gauges, of course, are listed either on both sides here. If you actually take a look, you can see them very clearly. Notice we have a speed brake on here, which is a little different for little planes. But again, if you had this aircraft in VR, you'd go, holy smokes, this thing's tiny. So don't worry about that too much. All right, we're going to activate the master switch, which is the one that's over here on the left. So as soon as we do that, that's pretty much all we have to do to get this thing ready to start. We're going to go ahead and pop on our choke, which is this little handle right here. Again, this aircraft is so tiny, it actually has a choke, which it blows my mind just a teeny tiny bit here. But again, it totally depends on how you're kind of using it and all that kind of stuff. All right, next things next, we're going to go ahead and fire on our little lights to give everybody around us a little heads up that we're about to get started. I'm going to look around the window real quick, make sure we're not going to chop anybody up that we shouldn't be chopping up. It looks pretty good to me. And then we're just going to go ahead and crank the starter over on this thing until it starts up. One thing you do want to do is push the throttle just a teeny tiny bit forward, just to confirm that everything is working the way that you want it to work. I'm actually going to activate the avionics switch, which I know is usually very naughty for airplanes, but this particular one asks you to actually start the avionics switch so you have the ability to monitor your engine. All right, let's go ahead and click it over to the start position and crank it. And that's it. This thing came up real quick. You want to kill the choke. Sometimes you have to hold the choke for a few moments just to kind of make sure everything's clear. I think he just ducked. That was probably the guy doing his little ramp inspection there. He's like, oh, did you just do what I think you just did? Okay, now that we're started, this thing's pretty good. Because of the size of this engine, because it's an older engine, you are supposed to let this thing warm up to about 50 degrees Celsius before actually going out for a quick little ride here. But I'm just going to confirm that everything else works. I'll make sure my speed brake works okay. Go ahead and set my flaps real quick. I'm going to make sure all those work okay. Make sure those come up and down properly. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my transponder. I love these old school transponders. They're so easy to use. I love how you just bop the VFR button, it'll instantly set your VFR set. So what we're going to go is, while this engine's kind of warming up for us here, I'm going to give it just a little bit of RPM. Remember, these are one of those little Rotax steelies, so you got to be very cautious what RPM you're operating at. They usually say to stay right around the 2,000 RPM point, maybe even as low as 1,800. And we're going to get this thing get warmed up just a teeny tiny bit before we get carried away here. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and select my destination. I'm going to press the direct button. So now when you pop the direct button, you're going to be sitting here going, okay, what do I use? There's our cursor. So you got to be careful because this is actually a two-part cursor, and it's like you have to use these arrows to surf around, and you have to use this to actually rotate where you're looking. So one of the techniques that I found that work really well is to actually move your head here so that it's easier to see where you're actually going to be dialing your individual commands here. So we're going to do Sierra first. Go ahead and pop this all the way to the Sierra option. Sierra. We're going to press the right arrow. Click. I kind of like that. I'm not going to lie. It's more reliable than accidentally hitting a bump and missing it. But you know how it is. Charlie. We're going to go to Quebec next. Quebec. And we're going to scoot over to Alpha. Yep. Sierra, Charlie, Quebec, Alpha. I'm going to press the Enter key. It's going to say activate. I'm going to press enter again. Rip. There is our destination. We are good to go. That's all we had to do here, which I think is really, really cool because old school system, but it works really, really well for us. I actually kind of like that. Pop back over in this seat real quickly. You can see our CDI source is VR1. I'm going to snap it over to FMS. I'm going to go ahead and reset my head. And now we are ready to start taxiing. All right. We're going to do our traditional. I'm going to go ahead and release the parking brake. Now, this aircraft does not have nose wheel steering. You're actually going to be using everything else. You're going to be using tail brakes basically to steer this thing. So it makes it a little bit tricky to kind of navigate. But nothing too bad for us. All right, I'm going to give this guy plenty of room. There's a VL3 right there on my left. And I'm basically going to take a nice gentle turn and kind of swing around this way. Come forward a little bit. Then I'm going to take myself a nice old left turn here. And it looks like we're following the fire truck today. I'm going to get out of the way of that lamp that somebody decided to put in the middle of the taxiway. But hey, can't be perfect. Now today, in case you're curious, we're in Carlos Ibanez del Campo Internacional, which is basically in the southern tip of South America. I went to see something a little bit different in a slightly different time zone. Keep in mind, this is the middle of their summer, and I'm going to have to pull out of the way of this guy so I don't die. Now, I always think of the death roads when you see those neat little pictures of, like, you know, South America with, like, the dirt road where there's, like, all these trucks and it's only, like, a 10-foot wide road. This reminded me a little of that, not gonna lie. Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed to our edge here. This feels a lot like a military airport in the way that everything is so spread out. Wind today is coming a little bit out of the west, so we're certainly going to take advantage of that once we get a little bit closer right here. Go ahead and zoom it, zoom. One thing I do like about this aircraft is even though it is an ultralight aircraft, it does have amazing capabilities as far as performance goes. It even has an automatic pilot, which blows my mind just a tiny bit. But to confirm that the approach is clear, it looks pretty good to me. You don't need any flaps for this thing, but you do need to be gentle on the turn because you will tumble. All right, line ourselves up at the end of the runway. This is the Tora versus Toda debate. I'm going to go ahead and push the throttle all the way forward. This thing's going to zip up to speed almost instantaneously. It does not take much to get an ultralight in the air. Pull back once we get to about 50 knots, and it will start climbing on its own pretty much instantaneously. It does not take much to get this aircraft going. And again, that's one of the great things about these small aircraft. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of forward trim here. Get my speed up to about 90 knots. 90 knots. That's incredible for most aircraft. Now, normally what you would do when you take off like this is you want to kind of avoid go ahead and turning early. But in this case, with such a short darn flight, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little bit of right aileron, and we're just going to zip right out of here and get ourselves kind of cruising. Now, when you think of 100-knot climb speed, you're typically thinking of much faster, much more powerful aircraft. But believe it or not, this two-seater can reliably do that. You can see the giant windmills come right off my 12 o'clock. I think that's kind of handy. And we're just kind of come spin ourselves around like this and get ourselves going in a correct general direction. I'm going to do some time over the ocean today, which is anybody with a single engine would immediately tell you that's a terrible idea. It's usually a quick way to drown, but that's all right. I'm going to go ahead and activate my automatic pilot. I'm going to switch on navigation mode. I'm going to turn on my flight director as well. Looking good, looking good. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my post every takeoff checklist. Just confirm that everything looks good here. Engine speed is good, RPM is good. Normally you'd want to go ahead and check your both magnetos to confirm that they're working properly. If you're going to do that, the magic power is about 5,700 RPM in case you're curious. I'm going to go ahead and check again, just look through my list real quick. 70 knots, bring up the flaps. We did all that. Short field takeoff. I'm just confirming everything looks okay so far. Flaps, okay, cruise. Now, there's something kind of weird about the flaps in this aircraft, and that's the fact that you have basically negative flaps. You can see I got this little handle here for flaps. My cruise flaps are actually a negative number. Now, the reason they do that is if you actually look at the wings themselves, if I pop up the flaps to flaps 0, I'm going to go pop that to flap 0. Nope. Go ahead and snap it. There we go, flap 0. You'll notice that my wings, if you look really, really carefully, you can see that just looking at it, we're actually slightly curved. Now when I pop my flaps back into the position, it actually sticks them up a teeny tiny bit, which actually helps make it a little bit smoother for an actual flight. So again, that's kind of a neat little quirk that not only do we have speed brakes on this thing, but we also have flaps that we can actually bend in either direction. Generally during climb, you want to use flaps 0. So in this case, I'm actually going to pop my flaps back to 0 degrees. We'll put them at 5 degrees once we get into our climb in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and continue just a little bit. Again, we don't want to kind of melt this thing or anything like that. They usually recommend that you use flaps 5 or -5. That sounds a little weird. When you're above 100 knots, if you're below 100 knots, you should be using flaps 0, which I just think is kind of a neat little touch. All right, we're going to level off when we get to 3,500 feet. Cruising 3,200. Again, 90 knots is pretty good because it's going to preclude us overheating. I'm watching my engine get a little bit on the high revs here, so I'm going to kind of be a little bit cautious. But again, we're climbing barely here, so I'm not worried about it too much. And 3,500 feet. I'm going to go ahead and reduce my engine a little bit. I'm just going to back it up. This is a fixed pitch propeller. No, it isn't. This is actually a constant speed propeller. So I can actually push my nose forward like this and actually reduce my RPM to get it to about 5,500 RPM, as you can see over here. Again, your manufacturer is going to recommend different powers and different speeds depending on the situation. As long as we're not in the yellow or the red, I wouldn't worry too much about this particular engine. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look here. Again, there's my propeller RPM. I got it about 92. My engine's at full throttle. We'll start reducing all that in just a moment. Okay, so now that that's all set, let's go ahead and get ready for a climb. I'll go ahead and reduce my manifold pressure a teeny tiny bit to 25 inches. I'm going to confirm that we are at flaps -5, because again, we're traveling greater than 100 knots, so we want to make sure that's set correctly. And now we're going to tweak the RPM just a teeny tiny bit. I'm going to bring it down to about 5,000, just to conserve the engine just a little bit here. Again, this is all virtual, so I'm not too worried about doing any real damages here. Just a matter of kind of reducing cockpit noise a little bit. You can bring this down as low as 4,500 without too much concern. Okay, this is going to be almost impossible. Whatever it lands at is what it's going to stay at. Trying to tweak a little tiny thumb wheel with my fingers is not exactly easy here. Close enough. Look away. It got to the right speed. All right, let's enjoy the scenery a little bit here. So again, we're on the tip of Southern America here. So you can imagine that we are far away from everything. So we're getting a cruise speed here of about 108 knots. That's going to be a true airspeed of about 115. We do have a little bit of a wind today, so we have to kind of keep an eye out for that. So while we're cruising here, let's take a look at the avionics real fast. Now, just kind of getting a feel for some of the features here. One of the things that makes us a little bit different is the fact that your controls are kind of mashed in, kind of combined here. So if I bring up the menu, obviously nothing happens. You've already seen the direct button. We also have our flight plan option, which is really cool because it gives us the ability to actually tweak our flight plan along the way. If we wanted to edit it, we could press this button and then use my arrows to kind of bop around. You can even come in here and set a desired altitude, and like I can come up here, like that. Then you could get a little excessive. Oh my God, 30,000 feet. No, I don't think so. We could even come up here and say, oh my gosh. Let's see if it... All right, we'll scoot one to the right, and we'll do 3,500 feet. So that way it's kind of preset in here. And again, I can press enter, and it knows we're supposed to be at this altitude at this time. Again, we don't have any fancy VNAV yet, but when we do, this will be very critical in order to do. We have a nearest button. Of course, we can change our barometer setting. If we push this, we can actually set in here and actually dial in minimums, which scares me just a tiny bit. Because I'm like, why would you use minimums in an aircraft this small? Again, we can set the barometric, we can go back. We can set our heading bug any which way that we want to do it. As you can see, I'm adjusting it directly now. If I switch to course mode, which I can't change, you could actually change your course knob if you want to follow VOR or something like that. Now, another tricky thing about this particular unit is if you want to change your frequencies, you're actually looking at your little Garmin GPS in the middle. So like right now, you can see I'm on 110.50, and you can see I could change that just from boop and tweaking around like this as well. So again, all that is featured in this particular aircraft. It's just, like I said, very small, but very quick for its teeny tiny size here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at how we're doing on our flight here. One of the things I love about Garmin is the fact it tells you your distance, it tells you your estimated time, and we'll see you guys basically right at the tippy top of descent. All right, we're enjoying our nice little view of some of the islands and everything down here, and we are right at the tippy top of our descent. So we're going to go ahead and set this thing up to go ahead and descend on its own. So I'm going to come down here to press the Alt button. I'm going to go ahead and reduce my target altitude to about 1,000 feet. Looks pretty good to me. All set with that, I'm going to go ahead and press the vertical speed button. I'm going to press down a few times to get myself about 1,000 feet per minute. It's awfully aggressive. Make sure you reduce your throttle nice and smoothly here. We don't want to be going too fast. But believe it or not, we can do a flight level change, which I think is really cool. And then we're going to be coming down into Cinco de Enero Airport, which and should be basically right off our 12 o'clock in just a minute. Now, this airport is a very small airport, but fortunately, this aircraft is good to go extremely slow during its actual landing approaches, which I think is kind of handy. You can basically bring this thing down to, 57 to 60 knots or so, and that's more than enough to kind of get yourself pretty well lined up for the actual ground, which again, I think that's kind of handy. And again, when you're doing this, one nice thing is that they recommend that you actually use some of your speed brake lever here during your descent. They recommend using up to about 1/2 position. And again, that's pretty scary. And one of the biggest things with this is when you are approaching this thing to land, you need to be considering how nasty the wind on the ground actually is. And if you got really, really bad wind conditions, you're not going to be using a lot of flaps because it's just going to bounce you around. You're going to be using more of the speed brake and using more of your engine to keep you going the correct speed. So this is one of the few aircraft that when you are coming in for your landing, kind of getting everything ready to go, you have to really, really consider like all the different characteristics as far as this aircraft goes. And again, that's going to be a little bit different. So with our flaps right now, if our stall speed, if we are a little bit on the heavier side, we're definitely kind of forward of our aft. But we're looking at the calculations with our flaps at 2, that gets us 47 knots of stall speed. So if we wanted to go ahead and safely land this thing, we just take 47 times 1.3, 47 times 1.3, which gets us a 61 knot approach speed. Now, if we wanted to go ahead and put our speed brakes all the way down for this landing, which is kind of dangerous, that would only reduce our speed by 1 knot. So we'd be basically doing a 60 knot approach. So if you have to split the difference, always aim for about 60 knots during your approach for this particular aircraft. Go ahead and reduce power just a teeny tiny bit. We're getting very, very, very close to the ground here. Look out the window. Now, the cool thing here is, if I recall correctly, this particular location, you're going to see basically a highway, and right along the side of the highway, you're going to see the world's shortest little runway, but it's going to be more than enough for us to safely land here. Again, you got tons of marshland over on this side. You've got a couple habitations. You've got some mountains way, way up. The Andes Mountains are a long ways away from here. It's always kind of wild to kind of see, different parts of the world when we're experiencing these kind of flights. All right, we're just going to kind of cruise along real quickly. Yep, there's our highway straight ahead. No, well, it's about as much highway as you're going to get. I mean, if you just take a look out the side here, just look at this road here. They always joke, it's like, oh, it's a highway to nowhere. Look at how far this goes. I just love this. This is so cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little bit more thrust here. So for those of you who have a HOTAS setup, this hands-on throttle and stick, I always recommend having one button for the speed brakes, because when it comes to land this thing, it's going to have a lot of excess lift, and it's really not going to want to slow down. Check it out. We got our little farmstead over here on the left. We got a pretty nasty looking lake straight ahead. And pretty much everything I could imagine. It's actually pretty cool. All right, zoom in a little bit, confirm that everything is what I expect it to. We got about 1 minute to go before we get to our destination. Good time to start our landing checklist here. We're going to confirm that our landing light is in the on position. We're going to make sure everything is all set. We're going to bring our RPM back up in just a minute. Power looks pretty good. We're about 5,000 RPM. Okie doke. Looks pretty good. Pretty good. Zoom out just a teeny tiny bit so you folks can enjoy this really neat little lake. It's just, like I said, we are far away from everything, and I just love that sometimes. Going to increase power. Again, we're looking at 60 knots with half full flaps as well as 1 notch of speed brakes. And I love the little details like that because it makes aircraft like this a little bit more interesting to fly. Pop my head up a little bit here so I can see better. It's one of the few aircraft I can't stick my head up on because it's so small. I literally smack my head into the ceiling. Good time, by the way, to flip onto your other fuel tank. According to the POH, you're supposed to do this every half of an hour. All right, you ready for this? This runway literally just appears. You'll see it. Like how this little hill, you gotta imagine like you're a kid out here, get your little ATV, you come out of the farm, and you spend 45 minutes getting up to the tippy top of this thing, just so you can kind of look around like, oh, on top of the world, and then of course you look right out the window, it's like, oh, yo. Just kind of neat concept is kind of what I think about it. All right, just kind of observing this just a teeny tiny bit. We're gonna be coming right in here, right where you're looking. All right, go ahead and get ready to disengage our automatic pilot and prepare for our last couple landing checks here. Again, our wind is coming out of our west today, so when we do land, we're basically going to enter into a very, very tight downwind, and then we're basically going to come around and pop this thing down. Go ahead and kill the flaps. Go ahead and bring this way, bring us to flap 0. I'm going to kind of do a little express turn here, because I don't want to get too close to the ground. All right, looks pretty good. You can see the runway. It's not easy to see, but it is there. All right, looks pretty good, looks pretty good. I'm liking that right there. Okay, this is our downwind leg. By downwind, it's, barely. All right, I'm going to go ahead and engage my speed brakes now. I'm going to go ahead and engage my first notch of flaps. This thing's going to start slowing down. You can see I've got the little handbrake basically between my legs. Bring our next couple notches of flaps in. We are just to beam the numbers. Again, by beam the numbers, I mean basically where that little road is, that is the numbers. Please use your imagination. And remember, going for about 60 knots or so is going to be our approach speed here. Going a little slow, but I want to lose a little altitude because we're up awfully high. All right, take a look out the back window again real fast. And that should be more than enough. We're going to go ahead and take our base leg here. I'm giving it just a little bit of thrust. I'm going to go ahead and do our Gumpfels list here. Gas undercarriage, mixed propeller flaps, light speed. Everything looks good. I'll lift up the wing just a teeny tiny bit. My speed brakes are now set to the 50% position. Come to the left just a little bit more so we can kind of beam it. Again, we're looking at runway 27 today. That's right off our left wing right now. A little off. Yeah, we're a little high, but that's all right. Push the nose down. Again, this thing does not weigh much, so you can get it going pretty aggressively. All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring ourselves into final. I'm going to go ahead and bring the nose down even more aggressively. Anytime, of course, I can engage the rest of the speed brakes if I wanted to. My flaps are as down as they go. All right, there is our landing strip. Like I said, not much to it, but 60 knots. I'm giving myself a little bit more thrust. Make sure your RPM is all the way forward for this landing. Whoop, too much. Get a little bit of a crosswind, but nothing scary. So right now, as this aircraft is coming down, you can see my speed brakes popped out of the top, and my flaps are all the way down. That's going to give me a nice and short landing roll. Oop, 60 knots. Man, these Rotax engines are a little picky. So this is our runway, and I'm not making it up. This is actually a runway. You can see it a little bit better now. Go ahead, back the throttle down a little bit. We're just going to kind of glide down. Remember, you're very low to the ground, so when you're low, you're not actually there yet. And dunk, we're here. Nice. Hold the brakes gently. Bring up the flaps. We're here. All right, hopefully this video was interesting. This is a neat little plane. Like, it's actually a lot of fun. I love these little speed brakes. Go away. Nobody likes you. Didn't I just say I like them? So again, this was just to kind of show you off kind of how this particular aircraft handles. Critical speeds in this thing, of course. Again, when you're approaching, you're going to be at about 60. You can use both speed brakes as well as flaps to land. Don't forget, when you are cruising with this thing, that you do have that weird -5 flaps that you can use. If you're going less than 100, you can use that 0 degrees of flaps. That's kind of critical. You've got a choke for starting. Honestly, even if it's cold outside, you're probably not going to need the choke. Don't worry about it. And again, this is a nice lightweight aircraft. It doesn't have the world's greatest range. As a matter of fact, if you want to see something real quick before we head out, you can see I burnt 10% of the fuel in my left tank and 1%. So I burnt about 5% of my total fuel for about, let's say, 15 minutes of flying. So if you do the math on that real quick, you're not going to be going very long distances with that. Other than that, hopefully this was helpful. Enjoy.